I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the Delphi murder case. Richard Allen has been convicted, but he continues to claim his innocence, fighting for a new trial. Now, this is not unusual, but what is unusual are all the circumstances that led to his conviction. Here's the story. For more than 5 years, it was a mystery, an unsolved case with many leads, suspicious characters, and so many rumors. Investigators released very little information, but journalists, podcasters, and true crime followers all speculated on what happened to best friends Abby Williams and Libby German, two teenage girls living in the small rural community of Delphi, Indiana, a town with just 3,000 residents. On February 13, 2017, the girls had a day off from school and they decided to go on an outdoor adventure. They were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge, and that's where their bodies were found the next day. More than 5 years later, Richard Allen was arrested for the murders. Someone no one had on their radar. At trial, he was quickly convicted by the jury based upon many of his own alleged statements. Allen still claims his innocence, and his attorneys are fighting for a new trial based upon some of the evidence that was prohibited from the trial, including evidence they say connects the murder to someone else. This was a case with very little transparency, from the investigation to the trial itself. Cameras were banned, electronics were banned from the courtroom. We heard very little, gag orders throughout. So it's been difficult for members of the public to truly understand all of the evidence in this case and what evidence was actually used to convict Richard Allen. That's because the public, except those people who were able to get inside that courtroom, were shut out from what happened here. I want you to take a look at this. Now, the defendant, Richard Allen, through his attorneys, has filed some papers, and in the exhibit to those papers is a tip narrative, which was a tip that was given in this case on May 15th of 2017, just a few months after the murders. Redacted contacted the FBI Public Access Line unit to report a tip on the Delphi homicide. Ricky Davis is currently incarcerated at the Newcastle Correctional Facility. He is in the same block as Ron Logan, owner of the land where the Delphi homicides took place. Logan confessed to Ricky, step by step, of killing the two girls. Logan told Ricky how he burned his clothes in a fire pit and where it was located. Used box cutters. Remember that part of this. Used box cutters. And struggled with one of the girls and thought drops of blood from his nose ended up on their clothes. Ricky also advised that he killed the older girl first. So Ron Logan is someone who was on the radar before the arrest of Richard Allen, someone a lot of people talked about. Someone who also lied about his alibi that day when he was questioned. So obviously he's sort of in the front of everything. The girls were found on his property as well. But how about this part of the story? Brings us to our first question in our investigation. And it's about Ron Logan. Did Ronald Logan confess? I get it, folks. I've heard a lot of these alleged confessions to other inmates who are trying to get a deal to get out. So they see somebody come in and all of a sudden there's a confession. But looking closer at it and some of the details here, can we answer that question? Joining me on the phone, Court TV senior producer Barbara McDonald, and he wrote a book on the Delphi murders called Forest for the Trees. Chris Todd is with us. Chris, great to see you. I'm so glad that Barbara's here as well. I'm going to go to Barbara first. Barbara, I know you spent a lot of time speaking with Ron Logan. What are your thoughts about this question? Did Ron Logan confess?
I never heard Ron Logan confess. He never confessed to me. However, in the months and months of conversations that he and I had talking about this case, he never said he didn't do it. He always said, they can't prove I did it, which I thought was an interesting distinction.
That's a little strange. That's a strange way to answer that question. You can't prove that I did it. Wait a minute, what does that mean? Chris Todd, your thoughts about this alleged confession from another inmate? We always take it with a grain of salt because I've seen it tons of times, right? But what are your thoughts about what he had to say about this confession? This goes back to May of 2017.
Well, I'm just finding out about this because it's saying it's newly discovered, right? Do we have a Brady Rule violation? So I just reading it, it's scary of what he's saying to this inmate. Obviously, we have to be careful with the inmate telling us this, but how long did they know this? How long was this information with the state? Did they withhold it from the defense team? And to me, working a lot of other cases, you have to be careful what the suspect says, right? When I read that, there's a lot of stuff Ron Logan is kind of hiding, but it is explosive to say the least, for sure.
So here's Ricky Davis's handwritten statement about this alleged confession. Now, this is June 21st, 2017. So again, close in time. Mr. Logan has made reference to the killings in Delphi, Indiana. He told me he was the one who had killed those girls that had got out of hand. He walked with them in the woods to his property, and the girls wanted to turn back. Said something about walking he grabbed the youngest girl to reassure her it was okay. However, they panicked, and he also panicked. He indicated he ended up cutting the oldest with a box cutter. He went on telling me that he killed both of them because it was took too far. I want to put this next thing up on the screen because we have to put some context into this because there's the mentioning of the box cutters. This is from the trial. Again, no cameras, no microphones, but we have reporters there. This is from a reporter's notebook. The witness, Dr. Roland Kaur, forensic pathologist, believes a box cutter caused the serrated marks on Libby's leftmost wound. Box cutter, that's coming from the prosecution's expert, correct, Barbara? This is the forensic pathologist testifying for the prosecution.
That's right.
Is saying it's a box cutter. Let me ask you this, Barbara. I don't want to miss this piece of it, though, because timing to me is a lot here. At what point did you, who has covered this story in depth for years, when was the first time you ever heard that a box cutter was used in this?
When Dr. Kaur testified at the trial. And he said he had only just come to that realization a few months prior to his testimony.
Wow. Now, give me your reaction now to this confession and the details here, according to Ricky Davis. Again, the inmate, we take it with a grain of salt. What about these details? What's your reaction to that, Barbara?
It's interesting. Ron was known to walk out on the trails and walk his property a lot. He described, according to this inmate, that he was just out and encountered these girls and it got out of hand. Now, the one thing that this confession includes that Ron would be offended by is that he panicked. I don't think he would like anybody to think that he would ever panic, no matter what situation he was ever in. But he was a very complicated man, and in my months of talking to him about these murders, I never felt that he was for sure not the guy. He said things, and some of the things that he liked to talk about with regard to this case were unsettling, for sure. And he was very focused on this case, even when he wasn't talking about it publicly.
Well, and again, you could explain it that, hey, the victims are found on his property, right? There can be that explanation. I don't know. I still think it's kind of strange, though, Barbara. I think it's kind of strange when he says, he doesn't say I didn't do it. He says they can't prove it. Those are two different things. That's not guilty versus innocent. In our system, not guilty is you can't prove it. Innocent is I didn't do it.
Right. And he said that repeatedly. Every time he was given the chance to deny that he killed the girls, he would say, they can't prove I did.
Wow. All right, Chris, you were investigating this on the ground. When was the first time you heard about a box cutter being involved in the attack and murder of these two innocent girls?
The box cutter stuff came out pretty recent. It was never talked about. There were thoughts that there were two knives, okay, because the girls had different types of neck wounds. One was a lot longer than the other, okay? And these Leo whistleblowers had told us that, okay? And that stuff I put in my book. I do want to say a couple quick things here.
Sure.
First of all, when Ron Logan's doing that, that's a form of an adopted admission, okay, that can be used in court, okay? Secondly, why are we talking about this now? When we had a video of Bridge Guy with audio tape of him, okay, Ron Logan's search warrant was leaked in 2022 where the FBI kept pointing at him repeatedly, okay? And now we're finding out that this confession was possibly hidden and not brought to the forefront. And I'll say this, it's not just about a confession. When you look at the Bridge Guy video, okay, where's Lois Gibson, who did the report with Robert Ives? They hid that for years, and she said it was Ron Logan on the bridge. Why did the prosecution and the defense not do any real analysis of height, weight, and gait, or use calculus and walk Richard Allen on the bridge? That person in the Bridge Guy video is not 5'4". And there's something else that really gives it away too. I won't say what it is right now. There's something that really gives it away. That Bridge Guy is Ron Logan.
All right, we're not done with this story. We have to say goodnight to you right now, Chris. You left us with a cliffhanger, but we will cover this again, obviously, and he wrote the book about it. Barbara McDonald staying with us. Coming up next, was Ron Logan at the scene that night?
All the other men are cleared. Can you use that word?
Who is all the other men?
A Ponzi scheme and a deadly poisoning.
A former pharmacist already convicted in a federal fraud case.
Now stands trial for the murder of her husband.
The financial crime gives rise to motive.
Did Natalie Cochran kill to cover up other crimes?
We're not here to obtain convictions. We're here to obtain the truth.
Now a jury will decide her fate, and Court TV will bring you every minute.
The Ponzi Scheme Murder Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings. Only on Court TV.
The financial future.
Now mean that all the other men are cleared. Can you use that word?
Who is all the other men?
The other men that were looked at during the course of the investigation that you always said we couldn't say that they're cleared. Can you now say they're cleared?
I may not use that word cleared, but what I can tell you is we don't have any other evidence that ties them to the offense at this time.
So they're not cleared. Despite the conviction of Richard Allen, it seems other people who were on the radar aren't necessarily cleared, but the prosecutor is clear in what he's saying. I have no evidence to include them, but I have no evidence to exclude them at this time. Well, this time is after the conviction of Richard Allen. So let's get back to the notes. Now, this is the sergeant handwritten notes of Ricky Davis, and we have them transcribed on the right. This is how the defense, Richard Allen's defense, transcribed these handwritten notes, but they're really important and significant here. Talking about knowing one of their dads, to walk with them. One of them wanted to turn around, so Abby or Libby apparently wanted to turn around. Grabbed the youngest's shoulder. It's okay. The oldest freaked out. Animals. Walked with them, willing to go check out horses. He, again, meaning Ron Logan, told them he had rabbits in the barn. Walked through the trail in the woods. The oldest was paranoid, didn't want to go. The youngest wanted to see the horses. Pulled box cutter out. Slit oldest one, hit an artery. Youngest scared. Took little girl with him for a while, never said where. He left again, came back later in evening, search going on. Later on late hours, tried to move oldest one to area not going to be found. Are you following this now? So from the handwritten notes, it's not just this box cutter. It's also that he's moving them at night. Which brings us to the next question in our investigation. Was Ronald Logan at the scene that night? And we know the prosecution theory is that the girls are murdered in the afternoon, early to mid-afternoon. But was Ron Logan at the scene that night? Let me take a look at a couple more things I have for you here, folks, because this is interesting. This is from the affidavit for a search warrant on Ron Logan's property. I said he was on the radar. So there was a search warrant for his property. And what did they put in their sworn affidavit to get that search warrant? Logan's cell data showed around 10:16 p.m., February 13th, 2017, he received a text message while outside his residence in the area of Abby and Libby's bodies. At night, okay? Ron Logan is outside of his home that night, at least his phone is, near the area of Abby's and Libby's bodies. One more thing I want you to look at here. This is from court documents. At trial, Mr. Allen, the defendant, okay, this is defendant's evidence. The defendant introduced evidence through the testimony of Stacy Eldridge, a digital and mobile forensics expert. So this is a defense expert, that someone plugged wired headphones into the auxiliary jack of Libby German's phone at 5:44 p.m. on February 13th, 2017, and unplugged it at 10:32 p.m. the same day. So this is the defense expert. This isn't prosecution evidence. I'm sure they don't agree with it. But you've got someone at the scene at 10:32. Was Ron Logan at the scene that night? Still with me, Barbara McDonald, and joining me, another person who was in the courtroom for the Delphi murders trial, criminal defense attorney and host of the Defense Diaries podcast, Bob Motta. All right, putting these pieces together, Barbara, I'll begin with you. I've got now in this alleged confession that he makes, he's talking about being there at night. Did anyone know that? I mean, was this public knowledge that people knew Ron Logan was out that night?
No, his story has always been that when he got home from the fish store with the fish that he had purchased, he spent the evening indoors getting that tank ready and putting the fish in it. He did not go and attempt to search. That evening, Pat Brown did stop by his house and asked for permission to go on his property and search, and he gave Pat that permission. But as far as Ron always told it, he was home all night.
All right, Bob Motta, if he says he's home all night and the cell phone data says he's out near the bodies at 10:16 and he lied about his alibi, so now you've got him lying about his alibi, right? You've got him lying about where he is that night. What are your thoughts about where Ron Logan was?
Well, I mean, the biggest problem with the whole Ron Logan thing is that the girls were found on his property. So, you know, and the reason that Judge Gull was able to exclude the third-party culprit as to the Odinist stuff was this nexus. I mean, I can't think of a bigger nexus than the fact that the bodies were found on Ron Logan's property. And then when you couple that with the fact that he lied about his alibi, and you've got a real problem. You know, it would seem to me it's near impossible for him to say that he wasn't at the crime scene because the crime scene was his property.
Yeah, Bob, and what I'm looking at here, like if this was evidence against Ron Logan, if Ron Logan was the one on trial, this is evidence prosecutors would be using to prosecute him. He lied about his alibi, ladies and gentlemen. He said he was inside with his fish all night. Yet his cell phone is near Abby and Libby, right? So where did Ricky Davis come from, this inmate, with this alleged confession? Did anyone know about this beforehand? Bob?
I had not heard about him. I've talked to other inmates, though, who have similar stories.
But you haven't heard of this guy. Bob, where did this guy come from?
this was in the tips. It was in the Orion database. So when they were just digging through 15,000 tips that were all, you know, called in from various sources or that were picked up through various sources, and they were digging through them to prepare this motion, this kind of just bombshell information came out. I mean, I don't know anybody that was more kind of in contact with Ron Logan than Barb.
Right.
Frankly, and like, Barb, was this a shock to you?
Absolutely, yeah.
So this sort of comes out of left field. It's in a pile of 15,000 tips, but it's not just a tip. I mean, it's an alleged jailhouse confession, Barbara. This is like a different level. It's not like, hey, I saw a blue car driving down the street. This is somebody said they did it and gave me details.
Right. And a man who was known to have lied about his alibi and couldn't account for where he was during the time frame that the girls were abducted. Now, he did make it to the fish store that afternoon, and he did have a purchase from the fish store. I spoke to the clerk. He had his receipt. He definitely made it there. But what time he made it there, nobody knows. You can't prove it.
Well, they can't prove anything when it comes to Ron Logan, apparently, and he was right about that. Barbara McDonald, in the middle of this story, thank you so much. Bob Mott is going to stick with us. When we come back, is the state's timeline correct? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the Delphi murder case. Now, the jury convicted Richard Allen last year, but it was a very unusual and unorthodox case, which has many people still examining what happened. Here's the story. Teenagers Abby Williams and Libby German were best friends living in the small rural community of Delphi, Indiana. On February 13th, 2017, the girls had a day off from school, so they decided to go on an outdoor adventure. They were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge, and while on that bridge, Libby recorded a man with her phone uttering the words, "Down the hill." It was down the hill where Libby and Abby would be murdered. Prosecutors say the man on the bridge is responsible, and that man is Richard Allen. But Allen and his attorneys say prosecutors have it all wrong. They say Allen is innocent, and it was someone else on the bridge that day who took the lives of these two innocent girls. But at the trial, the jury agreed with the prosecutors, and Allen was convicted and will spend the rest of his life in prison unless the defense can get the conviction tossed. And that's what they are attempting to do, pointing at evidence which was excluded and alleged false statements made to the jury by prosecutors about what happened and when it happened. So now Richard Allen waits as his attorneys try to get him another chance. Now, Richard Allen was convicted in large part by his own words, or as the defense might say, his own alleged words, because of confessions that were made and things that he said to others that others then told the jury. So the question is, did he do this? Well, the jury was convinced beyond any and all reasonable doubt that he did. But he's still claiming his innocence. His attorneys are fighting for a new trial with new evidence and the ability to present evidence that wasn't permitted at the first trial. Now, going back to that first trial, this is from a reporter's notebook. Again, cameras, microphones banned by the judge. The witness, Dr. Monica Walla, who was Richard Allen's prison psychologist. And this is Richard Allen's alleged confession about the day of the murders that he told to the doctor. He saw the girls on the trails and followed them across the bridge. Mentioned doing something with his gun and thought the bullet fell out. He told the girls down the hill and cross the creek. He wanted to sexually assault them, but didn't because he saw a van. That's an important part of what we're going to be talking about now. So pay attention to that. He wanted to sexually assault them, but didn't because he saw a van. Cut their necks, covered their bodies in branches, and stayed off the trails to exit to avoid being seen. So let's go now to the state's timeline and map of what they say happened when they were trying this case and convicted Richard Allen. 1:49 p.m., Abby and Libby are dropped off across from Mears Farm, which is located on the north side of County Road 300 North, near the entrance of the trails. 2:13 p.m., video from Libby's cell phone shows the girls encountered a man on the southeast portion of the Monon High Bridge. Prosecutors say Richard Allen abducts Abby and Libby and forces them down the hill to the south side of Deer Creek, where he is going to sexually assault them. The times are important here. This is a timeline. 2:30, Richard Allen's sexual assault is interrupted when Brad Weber's van passes by on the access road as Weber is driving home from work. 2:30 p.m., the van. 2:32 p.m., the van causes Allen to take Abby and Libby across Deer Creek to Ron Logan's property. Liberty German's phone stops moving at 2:32 p.m., and the state contends that's when the girls have been killed. So the girls are killed at 2:32. They put together the pieces of this timeline. Brings us to the next question in our investigation. Is the state's timeline correct? Is it correct? Is there anything in this timeline that doesn't jive with the evidence in the case? Joining me, the YouTube live streamer behind Gray Hughes Investigates. He's followed this case extremely closely and is, I call him the king of timelines. Gray Hughes is with us. And someone who was in the courtroom for the Delphi murders trial, criminal defense attorney and host of the Defense Diaries podcast, Bob Mata. Okay, I want to introduce something that was referenced in a defense filing, which is some surveillance video. Let's take a look at it, because this surveillance video apparently captures, or allegedly captures, that van, that white Econoline van on 2/13/2017. Notice the time, 2:44 and 33 seconds. 2:44 and 33 seconds is when this van is allegedly seen driving on that road. Okay, let me start with you, Gray. I don't know what you're seeing in this video.
Yeah.
If this is Weber's van at 2:44, does that mean that the timeline of the state is incorrect here?
It does mean that there's like a portion of it that wouldn't be accurate. I would say that you'd have to, it just changes when he was startled by the van. So you've got, when you look at the time on the clock, they said it's 12 hours off. Do we know that if it's 12 hours off, how do we know it's not 12 hours and 20 minutes off? So somebody needs to do some investigation into what was the actual time of that video. But let's say it is Weber's van driving by at 2:44. So what that would mean is, in Richard Allen's statement, he said he went down the hill and he was going to assault them down below. This is a little bit of a correction to the timeline that you had on your screen.
Sure.
He had him go down the down the hill, and then he was going to assault them down below. But then he got startled while he was down below. Then he crossed the creek. That's what his story was. Okay, so that makes, that part of his story wouldn't be accurate. I've always thought that he crossed the creek, then he saw the van. That's before the testimony of trial. That I thought he crossed the creek and was startled by the van while he was at the crime scene. And the phone actually stops moving from 2:17, I believe, or 2:18 to 2:25. Then at 2:25 to 2:32, it seems to cross the creek and then go up the bank as we get an elevation shift on the watch, and that's when or the phone, and that's when it stopped moving. All right, so it stopped moving. So it could still be that they were made to go up the hill. The phone was put on the ground, and then 13 minutes later, they were killed by Richard Allen, or maybe it just kept going on and on. Because the thing is if you believe Sarah Carbaugh, that she saw him walking, I don't actually put any, I don't put any weight to Sarah Carbaugh. That's like an hour later.
Right.
So what was he doing at the crime scene all that time?
Let me go to Bob on this. All right, Bob. There was also some FBI subject information sheet, which seemed to indicate that Weber's phone pings to his parents' address overlooking the crime scene initially at 2:50 p.m. What are your thoughts about the timeline now in light of this video, if the timestamp is accurate on that video?
I think if the timestamp on the video is accurate, it absolutely destroys the state's timeline. And the reason is this: probably the most powerful words that came out of Nick McClelland's mouth during that entire trial was the last things that he said to that jury, and that was that these two girls solved their own murders. And Nick decided to say that Abby, in her last act on this planet, was to hide the phone underneath herself, which would mean that that would have happened at 2:32 in the afternoon. And this completely destroys that. Completely. There's no way around that theory being wrong. You can't have it both ways.
I got you. We're out of time right now. We are going to continue this conversation, though, Gray. I know you've got to come back, but I'm on a tight schedule tonight. All right, I'll give you 15 seconds, Gray. 15 seconds. Promise.
All right. Why didn't the defense bring that up at trial? Because they know that it places the white van right there during the crime, and they didn't want to bring it up at trial. They've had it the whole time, so you might want to ask yourself that question.
Okay. Gray Hughes, Bob Motta, appreciate your perspectives. Thank you so much. Still to come, should Richard Allen get a new trial?
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it?
Grieving widow or mastermind behind a murder.
Monica Cementelli is accused of plotting to kill her husband.
Famed celebrity hairstylist Fabio Cementelli.
Prosecutors say she and her lover killed Fabio to collect a big life insurance policy.
The defense may say she's a bad woman, but she wouldn't be involved in a murder.
It's a whodunit Hollywood story, but will there be a twist that no one sees?
The celebrity stylist murder trial. Coverage begins following jury selection on Court TV.
And the judge did find probable cause for an arrest of Richard Allen.
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it?
Guilty on all 4 counts, unanimous by this jury.
I knew we would come to the day where we could say today is the day, and we reached it.
Without this verdict, we would have been lost still, and it would have been a heavy load that a burden that we couldn't carry.
Well, in the eyes of the jury, the prosecution carried that burden, and Richard Allen was convicted beyond a reasonable doubt of the murders of Abby and Libby. But it was a very unusual trial, a very unusual case. There were things that I saw and heard that I'd never seen or heard before in a criminal case. And we cover them all over the country here on Court TV. So that brings us to the next question in our investigation. Should Richard Allen get a new trial? Who better than to answer that than the defense team that worked so tirelessly and passionately in his defense? 2 of the attorneys were on Richard Allen's defense team for his trial. Andrew Baldwin joins us on the phone. And also joining us, Jennifer Auger and Bradley Rosie. Great to have you all here tonight. Thank you so much. It's a simple question, but it's not so simple, is it, right? Who wants to go first on should Richard Allen get a new trial? I'll ask Andrew. He's on the phone. I'll ask him first. Andrew?
Absolutely. Obviously, I think anybody that pays attention to this case knows how we all feel. I particularly feel, having done the majority of the work on the Franks memo that kind of gave rise to the third-party suspect, and then everything that happened after it was filed that furthered our theory that third parties were responsible for these murders.
So let me ask you, Jennifer, what is the process here? What is the road for Richard Allen to get a new trial?
Well, we filed our motion to correct errors yesterday. The judge can, if she doesn't rule, it's deemed automatically denied. She could set it for a hearing, or she could deny it without a hearing. Once that is ruled on, then we have great appellate attorneys, and they'll file their notice of appeal, and they'll take over the case from there.
So Brad, what sort of timetable are we looking at? And is Indiana law on your side with some of the issues that you've raised here?
Yeah, so I think the expectation in terms of a direct appeal is that this will take anywhere from, probably 18 months to maybe 2 years, give or take. It's not a quick process, but that's what we're thinking. Indiana law is on our side, especially as it relates to third-party culpability. You just can't strip a man or a woman, for that matter, of their ability to point to other suspects if there is some materiality to those suspects and their potential involvement. And in this case, I'm quite confident that that's what the appellate courts are going to sink their teeth into, and frankly should sink their teeth into first and foremost. And I believe that is, I don't want to get into all the detailed terms, structural error, fundamental error, whatever kind of error you want to call it, but it's the kind of error that gets you new trials. And I think that Richard Allen will get a new trial.
Andrew, we cover trials all over the country. And going into this case, I was expecting a different trial than we ended up reporting on. We didn't see it, but we reported on it. We had people there. You talk about third-party culpability. In this case, I was looking at third party, fourth party, fifth party, sixth party. I was expecting to hear bits and pieces about a whole bunch of people because I've been covering this story for years. But none of that ended up in the trial?
Yeah, we were pretty much cut off at the knees on, allowing the jury to see what we think they deserve to see and would want to see, which is all of the very strong evidence that links third-party suspects to that crime scene and to the crime. And some of the people are more closely related than others, but many of them are all kind of linked together in some way. That three really terrific officers, Kevin Murphy, Greg Ferenczi, and Todd Click, all looked into, and all, and one of them even hired a lawyer because he thought maybe Richard Allen was the wrong guy and that he didn't understand how the police had arrested him with all the other evidence that was so strong against other third parties.
Jennifer, is there an explanation as to why this case went the way it did? And what I mean is this evidence not coming in, lawyers being taken off a case when their client wants them. I've never covered a case in Indiana before, I'll be honest with you. I've never covered a state there. You just started to permit cameras, so Court TV hasn't spent a ton of time there. It's not that we don't love you guys. Was this unusual for Indiana, or is it just unusual to me because I haven't covered cases in Indiana?
Well, look, my first job was a public defender in Atlanta. I practice in Georgia, I practice in Virginia, and I've been practicing in Indiana since 1999, and this is unusual anywhere. Throwing attorneys off the case. And again, there's so many suspects where the evidence is stronger pointing to those suspects than to Richard Allen. Nothing about this case was anything I think that any of us have ever experienced.
Now, Brad, I can't opine on my thoughts on whether or not Richard Allen did it or didn't do it because I didn't get to see the trial, okay? I didn't get to see it. I didn't go to Indiana. We had someone there, but I wasn't personally there. But what shocked me from reading court filings and from covering the case is that Richard Allen was someone who was never on the radar in this case. And the first time we heard his name is when he was arrested. Did the jury understand that? Did the jury have any idea that this was an unsolved case for years and there were a whole bunch of other people and no one was talking about Richard Allen?
Yeah. Yeah, well, Richard Allen actually was on the radar because he held himself out to law enforcement officials within just a day or two after the girls were found. So, in fact, he, on his own volition, did seek out law enforcement and put himself on the map, so to speak. So he was on the radar. But in terms of what the jury heard, yeah, they certainly were aware that he did what he did, that he tried to assist the investigation, and that essentially that the police overlooked, in their mind, a tip for many, many years and discovered that later, which prompted them to get focused back on him and then ultimately arrest him. So, yeah, the jury heard, I think, a pretty full version or narrative of how that all unfolded.
Andrew, you now have a legendary quote that we talk about in our newsroom all the time. Journalism. We got a clip of you storming through the courtroom, looking at a camera and saying, it's time for some journalism. Is that happening now relative to this story, to this case, from your perspective?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of tough questions that no journalists are asking the prosecution.
What are they?
For example, well, one of them is Todd Click sent what I would label as exculpatory evidence through his attorney by certified mail to the prosecutor's office. They signed for it on May 1st, 2023, and then we never knew anything about that for 4 months until the prosecution knew that we were going to ultimately find that information out. So I think one of the questions I would want somebody to ask the prosecution is, why didn't you turn that over more quickly? That's there's a lot of that kind of information related to missing videos. But what happened? And there's a crime scene, a mimics crime scene image that was found on one of the third-party suspects' social media pages. That I have many friends. None of them have images of girls on a forest floor posed on their social media, which mimics in large part what the crime scene looked like. And that is missing as well. We had to drive down to Georgia to get that crime scene image, and nobody's ever explained why it's missing. And everything that seems to be missing is related to the third-party suspect, evidence. And we just haven't, nobody's bothered to ask those tough questions to the lead detective or to the people in charge of the evidence. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, Andrew, I'll promise you this. If we get the prosecutors on, I'm going to ask those questions. I will. I want to thank you all, Andrew Baldwin, Jennifer Auger, and Brad Rosie. Thank you so much. We appreciate your valuable time. Richard Allen was convicted. That's a fact. I didn't see the trial because the judge chose to ban cameras and electronic reporting from inside the courtroom. That's another fact. The defense was barred from presenting the evidence they wanted in front of the jury. That's a fact. Did Richard Allen have a fair trial? I'll tell you what, that's now a fair question. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for the answers as the investigation continues.